20 minutes.
You're on your own for 2 of those.
Yeah, we'll get through this pretty quick, and then we'll take some time to just, whatever time you guys need at the end, if we can do some question and answer just to make sure you guys are all ready to go. So what I want to do, I'll go ahead and get started. But what I want to do is just give a little background as to who Learning Dynamics is, because I think that really lends some insight to the development of the program and why we're able to achieve some of the results that we do with this reading program. And we're definitely different than most every curriculum that comes through the door. And what I mean by that is our primary business is we actually own and run our own academic centers here in Utah and Arizona. And we've got 5 centers. We're currently building a sixth center here in Utah. We've got over 2,000 kids in those, and that's primarily what we do. It hasn't been until, I guess, about 5 years ago that we finally introduced our curriculum into the public schools. And so I guess I'll share a little background, just like I said, because I think it really shows why we stand out and what's different about us than everything out there. And I'll start right at the beginning. So it started about 30 plus years ago. And it was actually my business partner's mom who decided that she wanted to start this pre-K academic center. And so at the time, she didn't have a lot of educational experience, but she had a lot of experience working with kids this age. And so one thing, I'm sure you guys have echoed the same response this age, just unbelievable, right? They think they can accomplish anything. And, you can go put a cape on them and they climb up on the roof and they literally jump off because they think they can fly. And she loved that about these kids this age, and she wanted to keep them thinking big as they start to get into their formal education. And so as they started to think about this and developing their center, she's like, you know what, if we can give these kids the gift of reading very early on, what an incredible head start that's going to give them as they get into their formal education. And so what they decided to do was they said, all right, let's go out, let's find the best reading program that we can get our hands on. We'll bring that in-house, and we'll make that the cornerstone of our education center. And so ultimately, they went out and they couldn't find what they were looking for. So what they decided to do was they were a little bit naive to this process in the beginning. But what they decided to do was they got a group of teachers together, and they said, let's go get all the programs we can get our hands on. We'll bring that in-house, and we'll start to piecemeal some of these programs and create our own lessons. We'll take it into the classroom. We'll work with the kids. Then we'll get back together and say, okay, what worked, what didn't work, and then revamp the lessons. And so what they thought was going to be a relatively short process, 17 years later, we ended up coming up with the program that we have now here today. And so at our centers now, the kids that are attending, we've got a 96% graduation rate of these kids reading on a first or second grade level. And this is prior to even entering kindergarten. And so, like I said, our primary business is running our centers, and we got introduced to the public schools about 5-6 years back. And that all came about by a group out in Southern California known as CALSA. And that's the California Association of Latino Superintendents and Administrators. And so the director of that was also an assistant superintendent in Pomona, California. And at the time, they needed some desperate help with their kids there in reading. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with Pomona, California. I know it's on the other coast, but it's a very high English learner base. In fact, the highest English learner base in the state of California. And, the kids were just struggling, far below the national average. And she heard a little bit about what we were doing in Utah and said, we desperately need some help. But she had some questions, and she was a little bit skeptical because out in California, in Southern California in particular, it's a different demographic than what we have here in Utah and Arizona. And so that was one thing that made her a little bit skeptical. The next thing is, kids pay to be at our centers, right? And so they come from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And so she's like, you know what, I need to see really what it is that you guys do, and then we can talk a little bit. So we flew her out to our centers, and she sat in, and of course she wanted to focus in on a few of the English learners that we had. And she spent a few hours with them. And then after a few hours, we got back together and we said, how did it go? And, you know, it was interesting because she paused and almost was emotional about it. And she said, you know what? This is unbelievable. Not only do these kids read, they comprehend, they self-correct. This is incredible. I got to get this. And so we said, well, at the time, we actually didn't sell and allow our curriculum into the public schools, but we said, why don't we first do a quick pilot, see how it works, and then we'll go from there. And so what we decided to do was we wanted to get a broad spectrum of kids. And so we did a pilot in a TK class in California. TK is what they call transitional kinder. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but it's all the kids that missed the cutoff date for kinder in California. So we placed it in there. We placed it in a kinder class with special needs, and then also a pre-K class. And so what was really interesting about this, about 2 months in, we went back and we're doing some site visits and just trying to see how it went. And every child that was on that pilot but one was reading. Now with that one child that wasn't, they were able to identify some special needs, where before that child was getting lost in the mix because there were so many kids just struggling. And so to make a long story short, since then, we've now spread to over 200 districts across the country, and ultimately that's what led us to you guys in Putnam. So anyway, I think that kind of gives a little background as to the genesis of this program, and that's really what separates this from anything else that's out there. And that is that it was developed, we're just like you guys, right? This was developed in the classroom, working with kids, seeing what motivates them, what they respond to. Where most every other program out there is developed by PhDs somewhere, speculating on what kids might respond to, but ultimately they don't have that classroom experience. So let's go ahead and get started. A couple of things I want to go through. We just did an introduction. Are you guys able to see this on your screen okay? And then if you guys want to unmute, I'm going to have some parts here where we have some interaction. So if you want to unmute as well, we can do that. But we're going to talk about the methodology a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about what we do, but also why we do it. And then we're going to talk about some things in this program that really set us apart from anything else that's out there. You'll see some things that are very similar to some of the programs that are out there, but very quickly, you'll notice some of the things that really are different and that set us apart. And so real quickly, before we do that and jump into the methodology, I want to take you guys through a fun little example for a moment to illustrate a point. So just for a moment, pretend that you're away from the classroom and that you're driving to school in the morning. And as you're driving down the street, you pull up to an intersection. As you pull up to this intersection, you notice that there's a traffic sign on the right-hand side. It happens to be a stop sign. And as you're looking at that, can you guys tell me how many sides are on a stop sign? 8, right? They're octagons, and what color are they? I'm assuming you guys are still on mute, so I can't hear anything, but everybody knows they're red and white, right? Nod your head, and then I can get some feedback. So yeah, they're red and white, perfect. So now you pass through that intersection, and you're driving down the street. Now you pull up to another intersection. Now there's another traffic sign. This time it happens to be a yield sign. And how many sides are on a yield sign? 3, right? They're triangles. Everybody knows they're triangles. And what color are yield signs? I can't hear any feedback, so I'm not sure. I don't know if you guys are on mute, but I'm not hearing you at all. But how many, if you think a yield sign is yellow, raise your hand. If you think it's a different color, raise your hand. All right, well, let's go ahead and take a look here. There's an actual yield sign. I don't know if that looks familiar to anybody. Does that look familiar to you? So yield signs are actually red and white. But most everybody, we do this a lot, and most everybody out there answers that they're yellow and black. And I know I'm not, for some reason, the audio portion isn't connecting, so this is a little bit more difficult. But the reason for that is yield signs used to be yellow and black. But that changed about it was actually in the 1970s the government passed a bill to change all yield signs from yellow and black to red and white. But what's interesting about that is in our mind, they still remain yellow and black. And the reason for that is once we learn something to be true, even though factually there might be something different right in front of us, what we believe to be true becomes our reality. And the reality is in this country, 3 out of every 4 kids are not reading proficiently by the 3rd grade. And yet everything out there as far as what curriculum is producing hasn't changed. And so the reason we do this illustration is just to say, have an open mind. Maybe there's something different we can do to get some results that are different and will change what's happening with reading in this country. So let's go ahead and jump into this. We're going to cover a sample lesson. We're going to do some student tracking. I'm going to skip through this stuff. This isn't too important, but here's how it works. So right here is, and you guys that have your materials, you're welcome to open up to this if you want, but it's just the table of contents, and it looks like this. So in the very beginning, as they started to think about this process, they said, all right, we want to be able to communicate with these kids very early on the purpose for learning their letters and sounds. Obviously, the purpose for learning the letters and sounds is when you can combine them together, you can start to create words, right? When you can create words, you can start to now read your own stories, and the world of possibilities opens up. And so they said, why don't we do this? Why don't we teach our kids the most common letters and sounds first? We'll then introduce them to the concept of blending very early on, so they don't have to know the entire alphabet to start to create words. Now, there's a lot of programs out there that do this now, and they do that because that's what research supports. So even though these programs do this, I don't think they know really why they do it. They just do it because that's what the research supports. And I'll illustrate that here in a moment. But what we do is we start with the letter M, the very first lesson. Our lessons are very short. They're only 15 to 20 minutes long, and we teach every other day. So we start with the letter M. When we teach this lesson, the only thing that we want these kids to know is that symbol right there is the letter M, and the sound that it makes is That's it. So we teach them that letter, we take a day off, then we move on to the next lesson. Now we introduce them to the letter A, but we introduce them to short vowel A only. And the reason for that is we don't want to make it complicated. We want to make it very simple for them early so they're having success and they don't lose their confidence. Once we teach them the letter A, then we move on to P, then S, and then T. Now, once they have learned these first 5 letters and sounds, this is when we introduce them to the concept of blending. This is only about 2 weeks into the program. And so like everything else that we do in this program, we want to make it fun. We want to make it engaging for the kids. And so the way we teach blending is no different. What we do is we teach our kids and we say, hey, guess what, you guys? You've got this little motor inside your mouth. And when you turn that motor on, it's going to make a sound. And if you keep that sound running, you can actually combine it with other sounds and you can start to create words. So we go, for example, if A says A and M says we want everybody to turn on your motors and we're going to combine these sounds together and create a word. And so we go, am. So we teach them that concept of blending. So now, even though these kids only know 5 letters and sounds, with just those 5 letters and sounds, they can create words like map, ham, sat, tap, and at. And all of a sudden that becomes exciting to them. That's motivating. They start to see the purpose of why they're doing this. And so from there, what we do is we add 3 more letters and sounds. We add the letter B. We teach them all the combination of words that they can do with those 6. Then we add the letter H and then the letter G. Now, once they have learned these first 8 letters and sounds, this is when we introduce them to their very first book. This is about 3.5 to 4 weeks into the program. Now, as we started to figure out the methodology that they were responding to, now we thought, logically, okay, these kids have only learned 8 letters and sounds. Don't you think it would be appropriate then that we introduce them to a book? that only contains the 8 letters and sounds which they've learned. So that made a lot of sense to us, but what was interesting about that is we went out in the industry then to find some books that would complement the methodology and the way that we were teaching. Ultimately, we couldn't find any books out there in the industry, so we had to write and illustrate our own library of books, which is part of the reason that it took us 17 years to develop this. But the very first book that we wrote is this one right here. It's called Pam Has a Hat. Now, it only consists of the 8 letters and sounds which they've learned. So as we wrote this first book, our thought was they've learned how to blend. They've shown us that they can create these words and blend them individually and read them. So as we introduced this book, we thought all of our kids were just going to take off and start reading. Now, what we found out was a little bit contrary to that. Even though they could blend these words individually, about 30 to 40% of our kids were struggling and they couldn't get it. Ultimately, in spending more time in the classroom working with them, we discovered even though they can blend these words individually, when we grouped it together in a sentence, it became too overwhelming to them. So some of the kids would just shut down and they couldn't do it. So we said, all right, we need to back up a little bit. What we need to do is simplify. We need to build a little ramp, get them used to the idea of grouping these words together to create a sentence. So what we did was we backed up and we wrote 3 books now that come before that. This is now the very first book in our series. Now, it's the same 8 letters and sounds which they've learned, but now you open it up and it's incredibly simple. There is only 1 word per page. So they go through and they read this and it says Pam, hat, bag, and Sam. Incredibly simple. But they go through and they read it, and now after they go through and they read it, even though there's only 1 word per page, what do you think is starting to happen in their mind? Again, I've got no audio feedback, so I don't know. But obviously, so what's happening now in their mind? Even though there's only 1 word per page, in their mind, they're reading. And that becomes incredibly powerful to them. They become excited about that, and it's so fun to them. And then here's what's really unique about this program. Once these kids read this book, we actually hand this book to that child. It's theirs to take home, and it's theirs forever. Now, when they take ownership of this and they bring it home, who do you think they're going to read it to? Mom, dad, brother, sister, it doesn't matter. Anybody that's going to listen to them and just listen to them for a moment, they're going to read it, and they're going to read it 1,000 times because they're so excited about this new skill set that they've learned. And so then naturally, what do you think they want next? They want more, right? They want another book. And so now what we do is now we introduce book 2 in our series. Again, it's the same 8 letters and sounds which they've learned, no new concepts, except now we're introducing 1 sight word, and now we have 2 words per page. So same 8 letters and sounds, but now there's 2 words per page. So they go through, they read this, they end up passing it off. Again, we hand this book to that child after that. It's theirs to keep, it's theirs to take home, it's theirs forever. Now we introduce book 3 in our series. The same 8 letters and sounds which they've learned. No new concepts, but what we're doing now is now we're introducing them to 2 or 3 words per page, right? So their confidence stays high because they're practicing concepts that they've learned, but now we're adding a few more words per page, and they're starting to get this idea of combining these words together to create a sentence. So again, they pass it off. We hand this book to that child. Again, it's theirs to keep and theirs to take home. So now we go back to what is now book 4 in our series, and we introduce this book. Now they understand that concept. Their confidence is high because they've had so much success in reading 3 books. And now we present this book, and all of our kids just take off and they start reading and they thrive and they love it. Now, at this stage, it becomes very important that we communicate with the kids that guess what? When you read this book, there's a purpose, right? There's a message in here. There's something that you need to learn when reading it. And so what we do at the end of every one of our books from here on out in our series is we have some questions that we go through and we ask the kids, and this helps with comprehension and understanding. So, for example, the first couple of questions are always specific to what happened in the story. For example, what does Pam have? And so you ask these kids that question, and the first few times that you do that, a lot of times the kids will just look at you blankly and kind of like, I don't know, because they've just been trying to decode and break down the word, but they're not really paying attention to the content. And so all we do is we go back through and we discover with them, well, Pam had a hat. So then we ask two more questions. These are open-ended questions that get them to think about it. For example, it says, why do you think Sam grabbed the bag? And so now their little minds start to think a little bit about, I don't know, why did he grab the bag? But now they're thinking about the story, they're thinking about the content. This helps them with comprehension and understanding. So now if we go back to this methodology, all we do now is we've kind of figured out this methodology that's working with them. So now all we do is we add 2 or 3 letters, and for each combination of letter and sound which they learn, we have 2 or 3 books that go along with it and apply exactly what they've learned. So in other words, there is not a word in any one of our books that these kids conceptually don't understand. So as they're now applying it in the books, their confidence stays high and they thrive and they do really well. So that's a little bit about the methodology and how it works and what we do. So again, just to recap, we do 1 letter and sound per lesson. We do it, the lessons are 15 to 20 minutes long, and we teach every other day. Kids are introduced to their first book within the first 4 weeks. Very simple to implement, and we can go through, let's just skip through this stuff. The bullet point number 2 here, I do want to just touch on that briefly. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Stephen Covey, but he's the author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And he endorsed our program, and the reason he did that was all of his grandchildren learned to read on this program. But he said the reason that it works is it creates that intrinsic motivation within the child. In other words, if they want to do it, they're going to do it. And they get excited about it. They get excited about earning these books and bringing them home. And so once you have a motivated child on your hand, it becomes difficult to slow them down. All right, so we're going to go through a sample lesson here in just a minute. But before we do that, I want to touch on one thing. So we get asked all the time, hey, if I come into a classroom and say, hey, I've got a program that's going to meet everybody's need. My first thought is, and I'm sure you guys echo this same thought, well, how do we do that? Because if I walk into a classroom and I have 20 kids, I've got 20 different speeds of learning. So how do we accommodate for that? So the way that we do that is we've broken our program into 2 parts. So the very first part of our program, let's skip through this, is what we call our class reading instruction. So those are the lessons that I was speaking about where we teach every other day, 15 to 20 minutes long. This is done as a whole group. The second part of our program is what we call our guided oral reading. So all this means is this is simply some one-on-one time that we hold with each child, and we do that once a week. We try to spend about 5 or 6 minutes with each child once a week. It's during these little one-on-one sessions where these kids will start to go at their own pace. So if a child is struggling a little bit on blending, that's okay. We'll work with them a few minutes each week. Those kids that are doing really well, great. We introduce them to the books very early, and we start them on the books. Identifying their letters and sounds. We want them to go at their own pace. Those kids that are ready for the material, let those kids run. Let them move. Those kids that need a little extra time, this is where we catch them up in this one-on-one time. I'll elaborate a little bit more on that as we get into this towards the end. But this way, all of the kids are allowed to go at their own pace, and we're able to effectively have each kid progress through the program. So let's go through a sample lesson. I'm going to put this up on the screen, but you can also open up your lesson manual if you'd like to just look at it. But this is the letter M. So the first thing that you'll notice is there is a fair amount of structure to this, right? Everything is done. which is nice. As a presenter and a teacher, there's little or no preparation to doing this. Everything is done, it's laid out. It's laid out in a format where a parent can teach this at home. It's very simple, very easy to follow. And so the only preparation that you need to do before teaching these lessons is we have these little pop-out game pieces that look like this. What these are is a little reward that the child gets at the end of the lesson for learning something new. So as far as preparation is concerned, if you have 15 kids in your classroom, the only thing that you need to do for preparing for this lesson is have 15 of these ready to hand out at the end of the lesson. So other than that, you're ready to start. So what we do is you'll notice at the very top in the box here, it says the letter M, and then it talks about the pronunciation, etc. But at the very bottom of this box, this is where we start the beginning of every lesson. And it says here that we play the alphabet song. So at the beginning of every single lesson, we play the alphabet song. Now, this isn't the same alphabet song that we all learned growing up. And you guys could probably sing along with me, but you guys know the jingle. You know how it goes. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? You guys know that. Everybody's learned that song. But we found very early on that that was fun. The kids enjoyed learning it, but they didn't really learn much from it. In fact, if anything, it probably does more harm than good, because how many kids do you know, and I was one of them, that thinks LMNOP is just one letter and sound, right? They just kind of slur it all together as they're going through the song. And so what we decided to do was write our own alphabet song that not only teaches them the letter, but it's accompanying sound. So when we play that alphabet song, we issue, and you guys have these picture flashcards that look like this. And as we play the song, we'll go ahead and go through these flashcards, and I'll go ahead and demonstrate, and it sounds like this.
The alphabet song. The letter A says A. Letter B says the letter C says I know my alphabet. I know the letter D says D. I know the letter U says E. Know the letter X says.
All right, you guys get the idea there.
I know.
So you'll notice in the song too, we cover both long vowels and short vowels, so they're hearing that, and they see what they look like, and then they're also hearing the sound. Now, as I stated earlier, we start with this alphabet song at the beginning of every one of our lessons. And what's great about that, as they start to hear it, and you'll say, for example, hey, today we're learning the letter S. Some of the kids will automatically start to respond, and they'll say, S, S, simply because they've heard it several times. Now, one thing that's very cool about this program, in addition to the library of books that these kids get to take home and keep, we also issue for every single child a music CD. And they get to keep this and take it home. And on that music CD is the alphabet song which we've written, and we've written a letter song for every individual letter of the alphabet. And the nice thing is almost every car nowadays has a CD player, right? And so they can get exposure to these songs and these letters and sounds away from the classroom. And another thing that's completely separate and a little byproduct of this was when we started getting into the public schools, we didn't realize how many parents out there don't know their letters and sounds. And by sending this music home, there were a lot of parents that were impacted by it and could get involved and also learn along with their kids. But anyway, so we'll send that music CD home with them. Okay, so back to, and also we do have our music available, and I'm going to show you at the end, but we have an app for your tablets and iPhones, and the music and these lessons are also available on that app, which you can download for free. And I'll show you that. But also our music is available on the website. So if you are in a classroom, you don't have to have a CD player. You can just play the MP3 file directly from your computer. So back to the lesson. So once we play the alphabet song, then we actually introduce them to the letter. And so In addition to the picture flashcards that we give to you guys for instructing, we also issue these letter flashcards. Now, once you begin and actually start teaching the lesson, we no longer use the picture flashcards. In fact, the only place that we use the picture flashcards is with the alphabet song. And the reason that we do that is we don't want them to be confused as to what the letter M is. For example, we don't want them to think it's the Morty Mouse or whatever character that is that goes along with it. We want them to know that this symbol right here is the letter N. And so when we introduce the letter, we have these letter flashcards. And it goes like this. Again, it's all written down there in the lesson, but we hold this up in front of the classroom and we say, this is the letter M. There is a small m, lowercase, and then you turn it around. There is a big M, uppercase, and the sound that it makes is So then we hold it up in front of the classroom again and we'll ask them, we'll say, hey, can you repeat this and tell me what letter this is? And then they repeat and say it's the letter M. And we'll say, great, can you tell me what sound that it makes? And then they repeat that it makes the sound. And so then we go, that's awesome. So then you move on to the next thing in the lesson. Once you've introduced that letter, again, that's the first few steps. Now you move on to the next thing. It says now there's this short story that you read to these kids. As you look at this short story, there's many words that begin with the letter M. We have bolded those because we want you to over-accentuate that sound. So that's what they're listening for. They're really listening for that sound. So we'll read this story to them, and as we read this story, if you turn the lesson over on the back, we have this little picture that goes along with the story, and it goes like this. Morty Munching Mouse loves to munch. Munch, 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 right? So you're really over-accentuating that sound, and they're listening for that. So we'll read that quick short story. Once we read that story, now again, we move on to the next thing. Very simply now, it says we play the letter song. So now on that same music CD or on the MP3 files from the app or the website, we play track number 2, and this is the letter M song. As we're playing this letter song to the kids, this same picture that went along with the story goes along with the M song, and it sounds like this.
The letter M.
And so you can hold this up in front of the classroom. As they go through and they sing these words, you can point to them if you would like. But again, it's not necessary. They're just listening for that sound.
Like munching muffins, mushrooms, macaroni. I love the letter M.
So she'll go through, she'll sing the first verse, the second verse, the kids join in, they start to sing along with it.
Here's the sound of like munching. Your turn. Good.
All right,
Muffins.
you guys get the idea there.
Mushroom.
I don't want to let you listen to it too long. You're going to end up singing that M song the rest of the day and it won't leave your head. That's true. There's something about the music, right? The kids just gravitate to music and they love to listen to it, and they just sit down and they absorb it, and it becomes very fun for them. So we play that alphabet song. Now, once we play the alphabet song, we go back to the lesson. Whoops, I'm on the letter A. So we go back to the lesson, we played the letter song, then we move on to the next thing. Now it says there's a little student-led activity that we do with the kids. And so here's how this works. In addition to the library of books that these kids keep, the music CD that they get to keep and take home, we issue every child this student workbook. Now, what's great about that is anybody that's presenting this program, everything is done again. There's no photocopies to be made because everything's here and it's all ready to go. So each child has their own activity book, and here's what we do. At the very top, you'll notice there is a big M and a little m. What we want our kids to do in the space provided is we want them to write a big M and a little m. And as they're making that motion of writing it, they're imprinting on their mind that that symbol is the letter M. Now, this is not necessarily meant to teach handwriting. Again, that may benefit it, but the whole idea is for them to make that motion of writing the M. Now, for some of our kids that are a little bit younger and they can't do this yet, that's okay. All we do is we get a yellow highlighter, we'll write a big M and a little m, and then they can trace it. So they're still making that same motion. Now, once we do this, we write a big M and a little m. We now take our own copy, and we show this in front of the entire classroom, and we'll point to each picture, and we'll ask the class, hey, what is this? And then they respond, well, that's a mouse. Can you guys hear the sound in mouse? And they're like, yeah, we can hear it. Great, draw a circle around that. What's this over here? Oh, that's a mop. Can you guys hear the sound in mop? And they're like, yeah, we can hear it. Okay, circle that one. Well, what's this over here? Oh, that's a frog. Can you guys hear the sound in frog? And some of them laugh at this and they think it's silly, but they can't hear that sound. And there's some things in this program that I still think are a little silly. And I'm like, do we really need that in there? But the kids love it, right? It's fun for them. And so they can't wait to get a black marker or a crayon and put a big X right through that frog because he doesn't belong. He doesn't have the sound. So then we move to the last picture and we say, hey, what is that? Oh, that's money. Can you guys hear the sound in money? They're like, yeah, we can hear it. Okay, circle that. So now in your classrooms or wherever you're doing this, if you have time, we do this at our centers, but you guys can do what you'd like. We actually have them color every one of the pictures that they circled. As they're coloring these pictures, we can walk around and we can reinforce with a few of the kids, and we'll ask them, hey, what letter is this? What sound does it make? If you don't have time for them to color it, that's okay. Just leave them circled, move on to the next thing in the lesson. So we go back to the lesson. We've now just done the little student-led activity. Now we move on to the letter song, and we play the letter song one more time. Why? Two reasons. The kids like it, right? They love the music. And then secondly, they need to hear things a couple of times before it starts to settle in and they start to remember it. Now, you'll notice in these lessons that we do, as I stated, they're already very short. They're only 15 to 20 minutes long. But you'll notice we switch gears with something different every 2 to 3 minutes. And the reason that we do that is we want to keep their attention, right? And we need to keep them engaged. Secondly, we want to engage all the different modes of learning to help them remember that's the letter M. We want the audio, we want the visual piece, we want the fine motor skills. All those things are going to enhance their ability to remember that that's the letter M. So once we play the letter song one more time, we move on to the next thing in the lesson. This is called our final check. And this is where we hand out that little pop-out game piece that I showed you earlier. And this is a little reward that they get at the end of the lesson for learning something new. So what we do at our centers, and you guys can do this however you'd like, but we have them come up in a line, and then we'll bring them up one at a time, and we'll just simply ask the child, hey, can you remember what letter this is? And then they'll repeat that it's the letter M. If not, we coach them through it. That's what we're there for. And then we'll say, hey, can you remember what sound that it makes? And then you repeat that it makes that sound. And then you'll say, you can look around the classroom if you would like. You can hold up a little activity that they did and say, can you guys identify something that begins with this letter? And they'll either point to the mouse or they'll say mom or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. But then we hand them this little game piece and say, good job. And so we give them that positive reinforcement for learning something new. And the kids just love to collect these at the end of the lesson. They look forward to that. And that keeps them motivated and excited about going through these lessons. So with these pop-out game pieces, you can do whatever you'd like with them. Some of our classrooms, they'll actually punch holes in them and make them into bracelets or necklaces, and you can collect them on a string. A lot of our classrooms just use sandwich baggies, and they'll collect them in the sandwich baggies. But again, the whole purpose is for giving positive reinforcement and something to look forward to at the end of the lesson. So from there, you're done, the lesson's over. At the bottom, you'll notice it says optional activities. So at every one of our lessons, we have an optional activity. If you want to do this on the day off when you're not teaching, this will just reinforce that letter. But again, it's not part of the lesson. It's just something there if you'd like to use it. But all we do is we take a day off, then we move on to the next letter. It's written and organized in the exact same format. There'll be a quick review of what the last letter was. And then again, you'll just start with the alphabet song and then jump into the lesson and teach it in the exact same format that you taught the letter M. So again, everything's there. It's all laid out. It's very simple to go through. And the lessons are fun. They're engaging. The kids enjoy going through these lessons. And so what we do, obviously you guys know this as well, but after you learn something, kids tend to forget a little bit. And so what we do with that in mind is after every 5 letters and sounds that they learn, we actually created a review lesson that you'll do on one of the days that goes back and reviews the previous 5 letters and sounds which they've learned. So we kind of keep that ingrained. So again, just to go through this real quick as a review, the only preparation needed is to pop out those individual game pieces. We start with the alphabet song each day, and then we go through the lesson, and then we do our final pass-off where we hand out those little pop-out game pieces. That's it. And then I mentioned too, after every 5 letters, you're going to have a review of what the last 5 letters and sounds were. So I'm going to talk about student tracking here in a moment. We'll try this again. I just want to make sure, are there any questions or anything else you guys want to cover on the lessons? Pretty simple, pretty easy to follow, I believe. All right. So one thing that becomes very important as we get into this and we start teaching the letters and sounds, we need to know and identify where each child is at, understanding their letters and sounds. Kim, it looks like you have a question. Nope, you're good? Okay. So we need to now be able to track where these kids are at, and we need to know what letters and sounds that they know. So when we're working with them in that quick one-on-one time that we have each week, we can quickly do that and work with them wherever they're at. Not necessarily where we're at in the lessons, right? Because we want them to go at their own pace. So how do we track that? So we developed this little tracking sheet that we call our ABC name and sound chart. And it looks like this. So here's how this works. When you guys receive your teacher materials, you'll also receive this. It's called a teacher's resource guide. And in this teacher's resource guide are a lot of the things that we're talking about today. But these sheets, these tracking sheets are also found in here. And at the end of this training, I'll also email you guys a electronic copy so that you can print those out. But here's how this works. So let's go back to this tracking sheet. So at the very top, you'll notice the letters and sounds are arranged in the same sequence that we introduced them. So if we look at the top, we'll go with the letter M. So what we do is right below the letter M, you'll notice that box is divided into 2 parts. What we do is we have our teachers use a red and blue pencil. And you guys can do whatever you want on that. We just want something that's easy to identify and decipher. So what we do is we'll have this little one-on-one session, and we'll say, Sam, come back. We'll hold up again the blue letter or flashcards. We don't use the picture flashcards, just the letter flashcards. But we'll ask Sam, hey, what letter is this? And if Sam can repeat that this is the letter M, what we do is we have our teachers shade the top half of that square blue. Now, if we ask Sam, hey, can you tell me what sound that this makes? And if Sam can repeat that it makes that sound, then you'll shade the bottom half of that square red. So now you quickly look at that ABC name and sound chart, and you'll say, oh, Sam already has passed off the letter M. He knows the letter, and he knows the sound that it makes. And so then we'll simply move on to the next letter, which is A. And remember, we only introduce them to short vowel A only. And same thing, if he can identify this as the letter A, we'll shade the top half blue. If he can say it, it makes the short vowel A sound, then we'll shade the bottom half red. So very simply, now you can track where each child is at any given time during the process of this. Now, if I'm to come in and say, hey, I want to see your ABC name and sound chart for your classroom. And if I look at that ABC name and sound chart and I see that every child is lined up on the letter R, something's wrong. Because there's going to be, invariably, there's going to be some kids that are further along than that. There's probably going to be kids that really aren't up to that level and don't know the letter R yet. So in other words, this chart is going to be all over the place. Some are going to be on the letter C, some are going to be on the letter R, some are going to be back on the letter N. And that's exactly how it's meant. We want them to go at their own pace. And so very quickly, as you first do this, it's just going to be some quick assessment, right? Some of the kids already know a lot of their letters and sounds. So you'll just quickly assess where they're at, mark the chart accordingly, and then start working with them wherever they're at. So any questions on that? Whoops, didn't mean to do that. So pretty simple way to track where these kids are at using their ABCs name and sound chart. Again, 2 colored pencils, fill it in, leave it blank if they don't pass it off, wait till your next one-on-one session the following week and start addressing that again. And then again, we use the blue letter flashcards, not the picture flashcards. And then we have these letter notes that we send home to parents. And this is more of a homework assignment for some of those kids that are maybe lagging behind or struggling. This is optional for you. You don't need to do this, but it's a resource that's available to you. And in this teacher's resource guide, we have these little homework letters that are available in here. And they look like this. So we have these little letters. They're both in English and Spanish. And you can send these home as a little homework assignment. But if you have a child that's struggling with a few letters, you just circle the few letters here on this that you want them to work on. The idea is when they take this home, we want them to practice those letters which you have circled. And when they do that, each time that they practice those letters and sounds that you circled, they earn the right to color one of these pictures. And so there's 5 pictures right here, and the idea is hopefully they'll practice it 5 times, color every one of those pictures. So again, this is a letter note to the parents. It's available to you. It's in the ABC or the teacher's resource guide. This is optional, just something to give you more resources to help out. So that's there. So let's talk real quickly about blending. Let me see how we're doing on time. All right, we're doing great on time. So I'm going to talk about blending just for a moment, because blending is one of those key concepts that these kids have to understand in order to read properly, right? And it's one of those things that we kind of screwed up in the beginning when we were doing this. And what I mean by that is when some of our kids would pick up a book, instead of trying to read from left to right progression, some of our kids were trying to read from right to left. We couldn't figure out why these kids were doing this. And then ultimately we discovered it was the way that we were teaching blending, and we were training their eyes to go in the wrong direction. And so what I mean by that, I'll illustrate that here in just a second. So as we teach blending, as I mentioned earlier on, we want to make this fun as possible for the kids. And so again, the way we do that is we say, hey, you guys, you've got your little motor in your mouth, right? And that motor makes a sound. And we're going to learn how to use that motor, and we're going to learn how to combine some sounds together to create a word. But first, we're going to practice using our motor, holding out some of these sounds. So we'll go, okay, so remember, you guys, this is the letter A, and it says A. So what I want you to do is want everybody to turn your motors on, and we're going to say this sound, and we're going to hold it out. And so we'll go, ah, like that. We'll practice. And then we'll say, okay, remember this is the letter M. And can you remember the sound that it makes is So everybody, again, turn your motors on, and we're going to keep this sound running. and then we go, and we practice holding out that sound. And so now we say, now what we're going to do is we're going to use our motors, and we're going to actually combine these two sounds together, and we're going to create a word. So everybody get your motors ready. And what we do is we go like this. And we go, am. Now, I don't know if you guys noticed, but I pulled that from right to left, right? And so that's what we were doing in the beginning, is we were pulling it from right to left, and we were training their eyes to go in the same progression. So just make sure that when we're teaching blending, that we go like this. We say, am, and we pull it from left to right. So we're teaching their eyes to go in that same progression. Now, when we teach blending, we do it in two places. We actually have a lesson that is done as a whole group. You just simply follow the formatted lesson, and we teach blending that way. And then we're also going to be working with these kids in the one-on-one situation, right? And we're going to use these letter flashcards to work with them on teaching that concept in the one-on-one time. So again, blending, some of these kids, it's going to make sense immediately, right? It just does. It makes sense. And they'll get it very quickly. Other kids, they'll struggle with a little bit. They'll take a little bit of time, and that's okay. Just spend that little extra time with them, because they will get it. We just need to make sure they understand that concept before we move on to the next thing. And so, again, just real quickly to recap, use the plain flashcards. If they have a hard time blending, that's okay. Stick with it, because we need them to really understand that concept before we introduce them to the books. Now, when do we introduce the books? When do we start introducing them to the library books? And this is the only criteria that we use for that. So it doesn't matter where you're at in the lessons. The only criteria for introducing the books and starting the books is they have passed off on that ABC name and sound chart. They've passed off their first 8 letters and sounds. They understand the concept of blending. Now we're ready to introduce them to the library books. So I'm going to take this one as an example, but when we introduce a book to a child, we have a unique way that we do that. And the reason that we do that is when you first introduce a book to a child, when you open the book, instinctively, where do their eyes go? Goes up to the pictures, right? And so they want to look at the pictures, and the pictures are important because we want to create that visual image of the story and what's going on, but we don't want our kids pretending that they're reading by simply looking at the picture. And so the way that we overcome that is when a child is ready to be introduced to a book, as the teacher or instructor, we will first read the book to the child before we have them read it back to us. And as we're reading it to the child, we'll start right with the title on the cover page, and then we'll talk about the pictures that are on each page. For example, we'll go, Pam has a hat. Hey, can you see her hat? What color is it? Oh, it's red, right? Is there something sticking up out of her hat? Yeah, that looks like a feather, right? So we'll just talk a little bit about the picture. Then as you open up the book, on the first page of every one of our books, every word that is contained in the story is on this very first page. We want to go through and make sure these kids can blend each one of these words individually before they read the story. Then we also want to give a definition, if needed, for what these words mean, right? As we get into the story. So once we do that, then we will now read the story to the child. We'll say, Pam has a hat and a bag. Hey, are these kids running on grass? Or are they running on dirt? Well, they're running on grass because it's green, right? Whatever it is, we just talk about the picture a little bit, and then we'll read that story in that same fashion. Once we read the story to the child, we now hand this book to that child and say, now it's your turn. We want you to read it back to us. And so now the pictures are out of the way, and now they start to focus more on the text and actually breaking down the words instead of looking at the pictures. So you may only need to do this for the first couple of books as you introduce them, right? Because once they get that idea, then instinctively they'll start to focus more on the words. So that's how we introduce the books. And again, the only criteria for starting the library books is that they've passed off their first 8 letters and sounds. They understand the concept of blending. Now, when we introduce the books, this is only done in the one-on-one time. The reason that we do that is we don't want kids doing comparisons with other kids in the class. For example, Sally, she might be on book 12, and Sam is only on book 5. That's okay. He doesn't need to know where she's at. As long as he's having some success, he's moving forward, he's earning his books, he's happy, he's excited about it. So what we're going to talk about next is how we actually track where they're at in the library of books, so we can be more efficient when giving them the books. And so we're going to go over that and talk about the reading log. So again, this is just to recap what we do when we introduce the books. So again, at the bottom too, I'll state we do have parent notes to help with kids that are struggling. If they're struggling with a book, again, in this same teacher's resource guide that I showed you, we have these letters homework assignments that we send home for the letters. If you turn it over, we also have some homework assignments if you want to use these for practicing the books. So it's kind of similar to what you do with the others, but you just simply write the date that the book was assigned to the child, and you write the book number. And then the idea is, again, you'll see 5 pictures that are here. And the idea is each time that they read that book, they earn the right to color one of these pictures. So again, this is in the teacher's resource guide. We have them in English and Spanish, and those are there for you to use as a resource to send home and try and get more of that parental engagement that we'd like to try and get. So again, teacher's resource guide, that's where you'll find those. All right, so let's talk about the reading log. So here's what the reading log looks like. This is also available to you in that teacher's resource guide. So here's how this works. So at the very top, you'll notice these squares. Each one of these squares represents a one-on-one session that you hold with that child. So let's say Sam has passed off his first 8 letters and sounds. He understands the concept of blending, so he's ready to be introduced to the books. So what we do is we write Sam's name there. In this first box, as Sam comes back for his one-on-one session, we'll simply write the letter B and the number 1. What that represents is Sam has been introduced to book 1. Now, when we send out materials, each child is going to have their set of books, but we also issue each teacher a set of books. And the reason for that is when the child comes back to be introduced to the book, this is when you're giving the book to that child. It now becomes their property and they get to keep it, take it back to their desk, take it home or whatever. And so when we're using, when the children come back for their one-on-one session, you're using your own set of materials to read to them. So let's say Sam comes back, he's introduced to book 1, so we write B1 right there on that reading log. Once we write B1, then we introduce the book to Sam, and if Sam can go through and read this, and you feel like he understands that, then we go back to the chart and he passes it off. So once he passes it off, we will now draw a circle around B1. That circle represents that that book is now passed off. He's ready to move on to book 2. So now what we do is we move on to book 2. So in the next week, when he comes back for a one-on-one session, then we'll simply write, what's happening to my, here we go. So now we'll simply write B2. For some reason that quit working. Let's see if we can do this. There we go. So now we'll write B2 in this square. That means that Sam has been introduced to book 2. Now, if you go through with Sam for a few minutes in that one-on-one session, and for whatever reason, at the end of those few minutes, Sam is not able to pass off book 2, he's still struggling with some of the concepts, don't circle it. Simply move on to the next one-on-one session, start working with them, and then the third week that you come back, now you'll write B2 again in this box. And now at the end of this session, if Sam passes it off, great, draw a circle around it. That means that Sam has now passed off book 2. he's ready to be introduced to book 3. So again, a very simple but effective way of kind of tracking where they're at in the library books. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind. When we are introducing these books, we get asked, well, what if a child gets stuck on any one book? How long do we keep them there? And the answer to that is no more than 2 weeks. If they get stuck on a book for more than 2 weeks, you don't need to circle it on the reading log, but go ahead and move them forward, introduce the next book, and hopefully that will jumpstart them. The reason that we can do that is for every combination of letter and sound that they learn, there's 2 or 3 books that go along with it. In other words, even though you're moving forward in the library books, it's not going to necessarily be new concepts. It may just be a different storyline that they relate to a little bit better or whatever, and helps them go through it. And then you can always circle back and then readdress that book that they didn't pass off. Now, the reverse is also true. If a child stays on the same book for more than a couple times, that's okay. But you also have some children that might be ready for a couple of books in that one-on-one session. And if they are, that's great. Give these kids 2, even 3 books if you want in that one-on-one session. Let those kids that want to run, let them run and move forward. Just give them the material as they're ready for it. So again, that's the reading log. That's how it works. And that's how you keep track of the books until you end up going through the whole library of books. So again, just to recap on that. So the reading log, give the book to the child, and then you can send the reading note to parents if needed. Now, a couple things that I want to talk about. First of all, remember, when you introduce the books, that's when it becomes the child's book. So we get asked, do you give it to them when they pass it off or when you introduce it? And the answer is, once you introduce it, then it becomes the child. And the reason for that is we want to encourage them to take it home and practice it, right? And so, and then some of our teachers, they actually like to keep some of their books there in the classroom instead of taking them home, because they realize as soon as that child puts something in their backpack, it becomes a black hole and they may never see it again. And so some of our teachers will just keep a handful of their books there at the classroom and they can practice on their own time. So what I want to do, we're going to spend maybe another 10 minutes and then we'll kind of open it up to some questions if you guys have. But I want to spend a few minutes on just the one-on-one time. I want to talk a little bit about the importance of it and also why we do that, because it does play a very important part in this program in teaching kids to read. And, you know, at Learning Dynamics, we're definitely not the smartest people in the world. But one thing that we do know how to do, and that is teach kids how to read. And so, you know, we spent years and years in the classroom, you know, seeing what they respond to and what they like and what they don't like. And one thing that we found is this one-on-one time definitely played a big part. And there's almost more of a psychological impact that it has with this child than it does the academic instruction that they get. And what I mean by that is, you know, we live in a day and age now that we're inundated with technology. And we get asked all the time whether this program will be available on an app or iPad. And we actually are developing a virtual program for this, so kids can now do it remotely with all this focus on remote and home learning. So we are developing that. But one thing that we found is there is something absolutely irreplaceable about having a physical book in their hand and being able to turn through the pages, being able to learn left to right progression, top to bottom progression. Nothing is better than actually having a book in their hand. So we will always have the books that go along with it, that goes in conjunction with the virtual training and other things. The other thing is, when we do this one-on-one time, it becomes kind of an emotional thing for the child. And what I mean by that is there is nobody in their world during the 6 hours of the day that they want to impress more than you as their teacher. And even though they just get a few minutes of your time each week, that time becomes gold to them. And it really has a big psychological impact on how they respond. And I equate this too to like when I taught my kids how to tie their shoes. I didn't get my iPhone and say, hey, I've got this great new app on my iPhone and it's going to teach you how to tie your shoes. All you need to do is plug that in and it'll teach you how to tie your shoes. But what I did when I taught my kids how to tie their shoes was I got down with them on the floor. We'd each grab our shoe and we'd get the shoelace and I'd say, okay, let's make this bow right here. And here goes the rabbit running around the tree or whatever it was. The methodology didn't matter. What mattered to that child was that I was sitting down with them on the floor, putting my arm around them or whatever it was, but it created that environment that made them feel special and engaged. And so that's kind of what this one-on-one time is all about. It's making them feel special, but it is also a time where we're giving them academic instruction and where they also can be introduced to the books and they're not doing comparisons with other kids in the class. So logistically, how do we do it? So what we do, as I mentioned, we try to spend 5 to 6 minutes with each child once a week. Now, if you can't get to each child within a week, don't worry about it. Take a week and a half, take 2 weeks, that's okay. But do try and hold these one-on-one sessions because they're very valuable. And so what we do is we try to get to maybe 4 or 5 kids each day. And so during the course of the day, by the end of the week, you've gotten to 15, 20 kids, and you've been able to kind of complete those one-on-one sessions. Some of our kids, you'll find out very quickly, they only need a couple of minutes. Quickly get them their book or quickly pass off their ABC name and sound chart, move on to the next child. And then the next child, maybe they're struggling a little bit, so that's where you maybe spend the full 5 to 6 minutes with that child. And then when we do our one-on-one time, we conduct our one-on-one time in the same place in our classroom every time. And again, this isn't a big deal, but we want to make it more efficient for you guys. And so, first of all, the kids start to learn, hey, when I go back to that spot in the classroom, that's my special spot, right? I know I'm getting my one-on-one session, and they love that. And then secondly, as the teachers, you've got your materials that you need to have readily available. You've got your library books, you've got your ABC name and sound chart, you have your reading log. And so you want those things where you can quickly access them and start to work with the child. And so we'll hold that in the same place every time. So again, just a couple things to help you logistically with the one-on-one time. But again, this is something that does play a valuable part in teaching these kids to read and makes them feel special and really excel and do well. So the last thing that I want to spend just a couple of minutes on, and then I'll go ahead and turn it over to you. We want to make sure, especially now in this environment where there's a lot of at-home learning, that parents have the ability to engage more with the child and the process that they're going through. And so one thing that we've done is, I alluded to it earlier, but we developed this app. And so on your iPhone or tablet, you can just go into the app station or the app store, and if you type in Learning Dynamics, you'll see that app, and it's just orange with our little child reading a book. And you can download this for free. So this is for teachers, this is for parents, but what is contained on that is every lesson that you go through is contained on this app. So if you download it on an iPad, you'll have access to every lesson. Also, in addition to that, you have the music that's available. So now you can access the music wherever you're at, in a car or at home or whatever, and they can go through the lessons at home with them and have access to the music and everything they need to engage more with the child when they're away from the classroom. So that's free, that's available to everybody, and hopefully that helps get more parental engagement, that helps the child when they're away from the classroom, and they can go through the program. Now, the other thing too is we want to make sure that we're there to support you guys if you have questions or anything that you need. So on this teacher's resource guide, if you turn it over on the back, we have 2 phone numbers here. One of those is my personal cell phone number. The other is my business partner's personal cell phone number. If you guys ever have questions or a need for anything, don't hesitate to reach out and go ahead and give us a call, and we'll help you with whatever you need. If we can't answer that, we've got 100 teachers that are available to us that we can pose those questions to. The other thing is if you want, you can write down our website, but we have some tutorials and videos that are available to you as well. So if you go to our website, which is www.4weekstoread, if you go there, 4 weeks to read, on the top right-hand corner, you'll see a training tab. And if you click on that training tab, there's going to be some videos and tutorials. So it's one thing to hear how a lesson is taught, but if you want to actually see a letter M being taught, you can click on that. We also have a blending lesson that's available to you. We teach them also the long and short vowels, and there's some of those tutorials that are there and available if you want to use them. So that hopefully gives you guys some resources. You've got our phone numbers and you've got these tracking sheets. And if one of you whoever is listening and wants to do this, I mentioned earlier that we have the electronic versions of that ABC name and sound chart and also the reading log. If somebody will send me an email, I'll go ahead and respond to that email and I'll attach those electronic versions. And so whoever wants to do this, I'll go ahead and give you my email now, but it's Scott, SCOTT, at ldreading.com. So D is in dog. So Scott at ldreading.com. But as I get that email, I'll go ahead and respond to that. I'll send out those tracking sheets. And then the one last thing is I will include with that, when our kids begin this program, we want to make sure that the parents are informed as to what to expect. And so there's a few reasons that we do that. We tell them a little bit about the program, give them a little background, but we also let them know that these kids will be coming home with some materials. And those materials actually belong to the kids. In other words, they're going to be getting the books, right? They're going to be issued a music CD. And we want the parents to be aware that they actually do belong to the kids and they didn't steal them from the school or whatever, right? So they don't have to give them back. And so again, we have an intro letter that we send to parents, and that's in English and Spanish. And I will include those letters that we send home to the parents with these electronic tracking sheets. So that's all I have for today. We're right at about time. If you guys can get I don't know if your mute buttons are on or whatever, but if you have questions and can get that to work, I'll go ahead and hang out for a few minutes and answer any questions you have. Otherwise, again, don't hesitate to reach out to me. You've got my phone number. You also have my email address now. And we just wish you the best luck. The last thought in closing is don't underestimate the value of these books. They're very powerful. Just getting books in the hands of kids is powerful. So powerful, in fact, that they did a 20-year study of what are the most likely predictors of a child to succeed later in life. Now, I know when I was growing up, some of the things they taught was, well, it's what their father does for work, or it's their socioeconomic background, or whatever it is. These things all influence your success later in life, but over this 20-year span of studying these kids, the number one thing that they found to predict a child's success later in life was that they had books in the home. And not just books in their home, but books that they can read. And so these library books that these kids start to accumulate will have a profound impact on them. It will give them resources that they can have and use. And also, as they progress through the program, you'll see it. They get excited about earning these books. And they love to take them home. And you'll start to see their confidence just climb. And suddenly, if they learn how to read, all of a sudden science becomes easier. English becomes easier. And these kids just start to thrive and do well. So that's all I have. Again, I'll just sit tight for a moment. If there's any questions, great. If not, I wish you guys luck and thank you for your time, and we'll go from there. Okay, thanks you guys. It looks like there's no questions at this time, and I wish you guys all the success, and we'll go from there and and happy reading to all your kids. Thank you.